likes the cold. He knows I'm gonna stay. Knows I'm gonna stay. California, California dreaming on such a winter's day. I took my Chevy Volt to drop my ballot off. I voted oh so blue, like a good little road, like a good little road. No more gas cars, not 2035, not 2035. But I can't even charge, 'cause the grid is fried. California, California dreaming. California, California dreaming. California, California dreaming on such a winter's day.
Welcome to the Beau Show. I'm sure all you boomers out there will know that famous song by the Mamas and the Papas, written by John and Michelle Phillips, released in 1965. The song was written as a longing for the warm LA sun during a cold New York winter. I took the liberty to tinker with some of those lyrics to call your attention to a relevant news story. That California has tyrannically decided that there will be no more gas-powered cars by 2035. They want to go solely electric. And I thought that was newsworthy. And what better way to do that than through parody and satire? And remember that art can signify the times. That song was iconic in ushering in an era of California counterculture. It was a signpost of the California sound, very ethereal and dreamy, thanks to production by Lou Adler. When I cut this version that you heard in the intro, I added a lot of reverb to give it that almost cathedral-like sound. The song was recorded in analog, which is almost unheard of these days. As the story goes, songwriters Michelle and John Phillips were in New York, and they hated it. They strolled by St. Patricks Cathedral in New York, and Michelle wanted to go inside, but John did not, as it gave him bad memories of parochial school. He had very strong negative feelings about the church. When Michelle wrote that second verse, she said John absolutely hated it, but he had nothing better. In fact, people hear that line about praying differently. She wrote it as I began to pray, but Cass heard it as I pretend to pray. And I think that's ironic because Michelle didn't write it that way. But I think about my own time in Los Angeles, which is devoid of soul and faith, but more centered on self-focused spirituality. So the notion of pretending to pray is probably more apropos here. The illusion of prayer. And that's when I decided to really stray from the original version and dial in tones of Governor Gavin Newsom, who thinks he's the next president. The third verse is all my own lyrics, of course, as I set the scene of driving in my Chevy Volt, an electric vehicle, to drop my ballot off like a good liberal would do. I'm, of course, conjuring up images of 2,000 Mules, in which mules dropped off multiple ballots in the middle of the night. We don't know whom these ballots were intended for or for whom the votes were cast. What we do know is that a person visiting multiple drop boxes at 3 a.m. photographing themselves doing it is a red flag. But in spite of that, I dreamily portray dropping off an all blue down ballot like a good liberal would do, and with the great virtue signal of knowing that all cars must be electric by 2035. However, when I get back home, I can't recharge the car because I've been told not to do so, to conserve energy. Oh, the irony. The regulations passed by the California Air Resources Board last week say that by 2035, the state will require automakers to sell only cars that run on electricity or hydrogen, though some can be plug-in hybrids that use gas and batteries. The regulation will help California meet clean air standards by cutting emissions, resulting in a presumed 25% reduction in smog-forming emissions from passenger vehicles by 2037. This is, of course, just an estimate that I found online. Rarely does theory ever result in practice. Cali has 43% of the nation's plug-in vehicles. But today, though, there are just 80,000 public charging stations around the state, far short of the 1.2 million the state estimates it needs by 2030. The U.S. Department of Transportation has made $5 billion in federal money available to states for EV charging stations over 5 years under President Joe Biden's infrastructure law. Under Transportation Department requirements, states must submit plans to the federal government and can begin construction by this fall if they focus first on highway routes rather than neighborhoods and shopping centers. The law provides an additional $2.5 billion for local grants planned for later this year to fill the remaining gaps in the charging network in rural areas and in disadvantaged communities. What is remarkable about that is that they are trying to target disadvantaged communities. But wait, only about 3% of car sales last year were electric vehicles, and they are expensive. So why would you invest all this money, billions, in charging stations in poor areas if the inhabitants can't afford electric cars? Are they planning on giving away electric cars like they gave out free Obama cell phones? Do you see the lack of planning and logic? You can incentivize, but you can't mandate. Well, at least you shouldn't. You may recall back in the Obama years that he squandered $500 million of taxpayer money that went to green energy companies like One that made EV batteries. Biden himself visited that company in 2011, but in 2012, guess what? One filed for bankruptcy. These green companies Biden and Obama invested in went belly up. Yet here he is again, trying to force people onto this technology. But here's the irony. California's power grid is stressed due to heat and to high demand. They have millions of people living there, including immigrants in their sanctuary cities. The grid can't handle all the demand. So guess what? The grid operator asked people not to plug in their vehicles this weekend. How rich is that? If they can't handle the demand now, how on earth will they meet that demand if they start adding charging stations and everyone has an electric car by 2035? The American Public Power Association asked residents to not plug in cars or use appliances, set their thermostat to 78 degrees or higher, and limit usage to between 4 and 9 p.m. According to Cornell University's College of Engineering, quote, "Today, most people charge their electric cars when they come home in the evening, when electricity demand is typically at its peak. If left unmanaged, the power demanded from many electric vehicles charging simultaneously in the evening will amplify existing peak loads, potentially outstripping the grid's current capacity to meet demand." Unquote. That's Cornell engineers saying that, not some kooky conspiracy theorist. People need to be able to charge their EVs when they come home. That's after 5 p.m. But the power folks are saying not to do that. You see, that's why this is a huge problem? And Cali's barely getting started on this electric stuff. They do not have a grid that can handle it. And let's look at price point. Ford's Mach-E, which is an electric car, is hiking its price $8,000 next year. Ford blames that on the cost of materials and supply chain issues. So they are making the cost of electric vehicles unaffordable. But Biden and Newsom want only electric vehicles on their roads by 2035. They have not planned appropriately. They just want to act virtuous. And we haven't even discussed how any hacking of the power grid would be a nightmare and a prime target for terrorists and China. This is government malfeasance on both a federal and a state level. But let's listen to an actual entrepreneur and a visionary, someone who took the electric vehicle market by storm. His name is Elon Musk. And at a recent energy conference in Norway, he said the following.
You know, in order for, one of the things, obviously, in order for humanity to have a compelling future for civilization is that we must have a clear path to a sustainable energy future. That's one of the things that I think everyone, would agree with. Now, I actually am not someone who would tend to sort of demonize oil and gas, to be clear. This is necessary right now, or civilization could not function. So I do think we actually need, and actually at this time, I think we actually need more oil and gas, not less. Mm-hmm. But simultaneously moving as fast as we can to a sustainable energy economy.
Musk says we need more oil and gas in the interim, not less. Outside the conference, he added to that.
I think realistically, we do need to use oil and gas in the short term because otherwise civilization would crumble. So in order for civilization to continue to function, we do need oil and gas. And I think actually, especially these days with the Russia sanctions, we do need to provide oil and gas to keep civilization running. I think any reasonable person would conclude that.
Any sensible person would conclude we need oil and gas. So here's one of the world's most genius entrepreneurs who created an electric vehicle company saying that for now, we need more oil and gas, not less. That does not sound like Gavin Newsom's plan or Joe Biden's plan.